we talk about building a diet for your horse, I like to think about it as a layer cake. This might sound a little bit weird, but stick with me for just a second. If you think about a layer cake, the bottom layer needs to be the foundation, the strongest, the biggest. And then each layer after that tends to be smaller and less important structurally for the cake as you work your way up. So the bottom layer of our layer cake is forage. Forage is hay or grass. Some people use pellets or cubes. And forage needs to make up the bulk of your horse's diet. This should be 1 to 2% of their body weight every day. So for the average 1,000 pound horse, that's about 10 to 20 pounds of forage every day. This number might vary slightly depending on what stage of life your horse is in, how much activity they're getting, if you want them to gain or lose weight, etc. There are 3 main types of forage that we can talk about. We have legume. This is typically alfalfa or clover. We have grass, which is Bermuda, coastal, orchard, teff, etc., Timothy. And then we have grain, and grain is oat, wheat, rye, barley, any of those. When we're thinking about developing a healthy, balanced diet for our horses, it's important to feed them, if possible. Not all horses will tolerate multiple types of feed, but it's important, if we can, to feed them at least 2 different types of hay. And the reason for that is that different hays will offer different things, but all of them are unbalanced as a standalone. So for example, legume hays like alfalfa and clover are really high in protein, but it's not always the right mix of amino acids for building muscle or maintaining hoof health or other normal body functions. So what that means is that your horse is going to end up working really hard, especially their kidneys, to excrete that excess protein that they don't need, but they're still going to be lacking some of those amino acids, and you're going to end up having to supplement protein back in from another source in order to make sure that they get the correct balance of amino acids. More on that in another video. Alfalfa also tends to have way more calcium than phosphorus, which can lead to poor hoof health, poor skeletal health, and it can even, in some horses, cause enteroliths, which are those giant stones that build up over a lifetime in their stomachs and can eventually cause a blockage. Grass hay tends to be a little lower in protein, but still adequate for most horses, higher in fiber and higher in some mineral content than alfalfa. However, grass hay also can be very high in oxalates, and oxalates can actually block the absorption of calcium. So we talk about alfalfa having way too much calcium. Often grass hays have way too little. So that's where if you feed a little of both, sometimes we can make up that balance. Next, we can talk about grain hays. Grain hays tend to be really high in sugar. So for a lot of horses, this is not a great idea, especially because we know horses tend to be really susceptible to blood sugar and metabolic issues. However, grain hays also tend to have more of the B vitamins and some of the other minerals and vitamins that the legume and the grass hays are lacking. So again, in balance with a legume or a grass hay, sometimes a grain hay can actually be a great counterpart. I like to see about 80% grass hay to about 20% legume. This tends to be the balance that in most horses provides the right amount of protein as well as the right ratio of calcium to phosphorus. Another way I like to think of this is like beans and rice. So beans, again, are legumes, so they tend to have lots of certain types of amino acids, and rice is a grain, so that tends to have a lot of the other types of amino acids, and they complement each other. So again, when we're talking about protein, having some protein come from grass hay and some come from legume hay will help to make sure that our horses are getting the right balance of all of the amino acids that they need for all of their body functions. So now that we've talked about quantity of hay and type of hay, it's also important to think about how you're delivering the hay. So most of us tend to feed our horses in 2 or maybe 3 large meals a day. However, horses' stomachs are only actually meant to hold about a gallon, just maybe about this much, at any given time. And if you think about how much hay we feed them in one serving, there's no way that that would comfortably fit in their stomachs. Horses in the wild tend to spend the vast majority of their day, sometimes up to 16 plus hours, eating, while our domestic horses will spend typically anywhere from like 2 to 8, depending on how quickly they tend to eat on their own. So the best thing we can do for our horses, and it's really quite simple, is to extend the amount of time in the day that they have access to forage. So if you can add a slow feeder, that's fantastic. Not everybody has the ability to add a slow feeder. So if that's not an option, they now have these really great pellet balls that you can just fill with hay pellets, and your horse, it simulates grazing. Your horse kind of knocks it around and they walk around and follow the ball and eat the pellets out of the ball. And either of those, or both if possible, are the best possible way to extend the amount of time that your horse is eating and has access to forage throughout the day. If you can, putting grass hay or a low calorie hay in the slow feeder and having free access all day long is ideal, and then adding in alfalfa or grain hay as your supplement for the extra calories and the protein like we talked about, just once or twice a day is fantastic. For more information about building your healthy, balanced, multi-layered diet for your horse, you can download your free Build Your Bucket workbook below, and that will walk you through all of the steps. And make sure you also look for the next couple of videos where I'm going to be describing the concentrates and supplement needs of your horses.